Hey, everyone. It's Sleepy Reader, aka Damien. This is the comic book countdown. These are going to be 8 comics from that I picked up on Wednesday, June 1st. And as usual, I haven't done this for a few weeks, but as usual, I will count them down from 8 to 1, ranked based on completely fickle subjective reasoning, or not even reasoning, just my subjective response to them. I have to say, I had a pretty fun week reading these comics. They felt a little bit odd, not in I didn't feel like I was reading in my regular zone, if that makes sense. Maybe that'll make more sense as I go along. I have a lot of comics from the last few weeks that I haven't even read yet, but I managed to sort of skip ahead and read all of these. So let me make myself smaller and I'll show you the comics as I tell you what I thought about them. So in at number 8 was this one shot from Image called The Phalanx. I keep wanting to call it the Phalanx. It's not very phallic. It's mostly female superheroes, and it's a tribute to the early Image comics, the wild and crazy superhero, over-the-top teams that seem to be a lot of what Image first came out with. And I guess Jonathan Luna, the artist and writer here, was 13 when they came out, so they made a big impression on him. And now he's had a whole career at Image, so that's kind of cool. But the experience of reading this was kind of flat. I mean, I didn't have a bad time reading it, but it just didn't have much pizzazz. And it's not a deep comic, so it needs the pizzazz, I think, to keep it going. It's too bad, but in a way, I'm not surprised. There's something. That was a kind of unique thing. This woman hulked out and broke out of her shirt. But Jonathan Luna's art and, to a degree, his writing tends to be low key, and it works for a different kind of story. I was rooting for him. I wished he could find a way to do this story and make it exciting, but I just didn't get that much out of it. Maybe I would have got more out of it if I was more of a fan like he was, a young kid reading those early Image comics, but I was a guy around 30 when they came out, so it doesn't have the same meaning for me. So I may not be the best judge of this comic. I'm glad it's just a one shot, but I look forward to something else by Luna. I guess the two Luna brothers are now working separately. I'm not even quite clear if I've only been reading Jonathan Luna comics lately or if some by the other brother. Anyway, it was an interesting, but for me, not totally successful experiment. Let's see, where do I put these ones? So I ranked at number 7, Once and Future. Number 26. It's pretty amazing this series has gone this long, although that's part of the problem, I think. I don't even know what quite to say about this. I'll be reading it and I'll think, I ought to drop this. And I'll be thinking, oh, this art is so great. I can't drop it. As long as they keep putting out art that's good, I want to enjoy it. Every issue we talk about the great line art by Mora and the fantastic colors by Bonvillain. And what struck me as I was reading this one was that although this is, kind of a sword and sorcery, horror / Arthurian legends / other literary British legends kind of stuff, like we've got King Lear and we've got Robin Hood and we've got various versions of King Arthur and Merlin, and we've had Beowulf and other things. It doesn't have, stories tend to have a certain shape to them. And particularly adventure stories or stories about these kinds of mythic characters. And this, I don't know what the shape of this story is. I mean, for a while it seemed like it was just kind of one thing after another and keep raising the stakes. But as I was reading this issue anyway, it just struck me. My brain is searching for a place for this story that it can't quite find. The shape is just kind of eludes me. It also had this crazy thing where suddenly we jump time to months later, which has not happened in this comic before, and it did not feel organic. It was like I don't understand. It just seems strange. And then we jump ahead again. I think here, but even here the art is so cool. So I complain about it, but I'll probably keep getting it. And I don't know. I've come to the edge of almost writing my shop and dropping it, and then each time I pull back and say no, I want to get it for the art. Great art, great storytelling in a righteous thirst for revenge. I'm ranking it number 6 because I found it hard to read and I found it hard to like because it's a torture issue. And I think it's important to the story. To me, this whole character who's doing the torture and is, I think, working for whatever the rich, evil people are who function on the dark web, but it's unclear to me who he is. And I just had trouble reading through this whole torture issue. I saw Jared Osborne on his live show talk about how some certain things in the torture he didn't quite buy into. And, once I thought about it, he was right about that. But while I read it, I mostly just felt uncomfortable and I was eager to get through the issue. I'm presuming all of this will pay off and have more meaning in the larger picture of the book. But I'm just not a torture person. It's too painful. It's too evil. Torture is one of the evilest things ever, especially torture on the level that we see in that book. And there's probably much worse levels of torture that I would have even more trouble taking. This camera doesn't like to focus anymore. Obey me, camera. Come on. Okay, that's better, I think. I don't know how long it was out of focus for. So then I put Little Monsters in at number 5. This is developing more as a horror story, and it makes you uncomfortable. And I'm not sure why I put it at number 5. I just maybe enjoyed some of the others better, but I think this is developing well. I think it's a pretty short... I think the plan is for a pretty short run on this, although I'm not sure, I might be wrong on that. But anyway, I'm still enjoying it. It's still a really quick read, and maybe that's why I enjoyed some of the other books I read. And it made me uncomfortable. My sympathy for these little kid vampires is slipping away a bit, but then there was an interesting twist on that at the end of this story that I don't want to give that away. But continuing with my loving the black and white, and I would like to get more black and white comics at this level of artistry. Although there's not much detail in the background I'm noticing here as I flip through again. Was there more detail in the earlier issues? Here's a more detailed page, but it's kind of impressionistic there, isn't it? Anyhow, cool book. I'm glad to keep getting that. And then kind of a surprise book. I picked it up on a whim. I don't get Savage Dragon anymore, but I'm putting the Super Freaks in at number 4. Little Monsters was number 5. And I just finished reading it, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. It's kind of I guess it's a celebration of this podcast called the Savage Fincast that's all about the Savage Dragon, but it's also just a kind of, it says fan addicts take control. It's a fan comic book about Savage Dragon, and that's really cool. I loved the fan-made comics I used to find as a kid that I would buy through the Buyer's Guide, the Buyer's Guide for Comic Fandom, I think it was called, or Comic Buyer's Guide for Fandom. I forget what it's called. But anyway, so it was fun to sort of revel in this just fanish goofiness. If anything, the artists here are kind of ringers. They're a little bit more professional. They have more chops than your average, somewhat talented fan who's good at drawing. But I love the spirit of this. And even though I think I've read about 20, 25 of the recent, maybe even 30 recent Savage Dragon issues before I decided I had enough for now and I dropped it, kind of right around the time that Eric Larson's art style or coloring style seemed to change on me. There's a lot of references I do not get here, although I do get some. I remember his crazy wife. But nevertheless, so I don't know which one of these are like playing against canon and which ones are just literally filling in stuff that is true to the canon of the Savage Dragon stories. I'm pretty sure this one where this candy-powered supervillain turns Malcolm Dragon into chocolate and then smashes him because he made him hollow chocolate is just a goof. But and then he goes to heaven and meets his dad, and that's the end of the story. But I liked all these short little stories. I just liked the sort of irreverent, like the writers and artists of this love Savage Dragon, but they're also kind of irreverent about it. And Savage Dragon has its own kind of irreverent tone at times. So I just kind of ate this up. It was fun. It's a very long comic, about double size, and so I took it in a couple different sittings. Yeah, it's hard to pick out one or two favorites, but I particularly like this one, Sinister Past, illustrated and lettered by Chris McJunkin. That sounds like a fake name. But I enjoyed the art here and just the crazy story where he is attacked by ghosts of people he's killed. And then it turns out to be from the powers of this character from Savage Dragon 210. I don't think I read Savage Dragon 210. Anyway, it's an oddity, and it's fan fiction, and it's kind of fun. Your mileage may vary, but I enjoyed it. A lot of times you couldn't tell who the creator or artist was. Like, I have no idea who did this inside back cover. Oh, it's very shiny. Inside back cover drawing, which I liked a lot. So that's interesting. Kind of two image homage books in 1 month with the Super Freaks and the Phalanx. But I like the Super Freaks a lot more. I put that at number 4. At number 3, we're kind of back to the story of incredible art. How could I not read this because I love the art so much? And this is the final issue of Step by Bloody Step, written by Simon Spurrier. It's a wordless comic. Boy, I got the glare is bad here. I tilted a bit. It's a wordless comic with fantastic art and color. The art is by Mateus Bergara, and the colors are by Matthias Lopez. But I felt, as I felt sort of throughout, and it became even more of a complaint of mine, that there's aspects of the storytelling that I just couldn't fully put together from the silent, wordless panels. I got the general picture, and I kind of wonder in my head, can you do a comic with much nuance? How much nuance can you put in if it's a long silent comic? Or can you only kind of do step by step, the step by bloody step? If you can only do this happened, then this happened, then this happened, and can you give it, how much more flavor can you give it? They tried to make it a bit of a twist ending. I won't give that away. But if if all the storytelling were more clear, there could have been more than just the twist, I think. There could have been more emotional impact to what's going on. I enjoyed the art so much, and I'm intrigued by the fantasy story here, that I'm definitely gonna, dig up all the previous issues and reread this at some point. But it is interesting. I mean, you can't even tell as a reader, did the artist not, like, did the writer tell the artist exactly all kinds of stuff in the story that the artist didn't communicate to me that well? Or did the writer himself fail to communicate to the artist enough so that the artist didn't communicate enough to me, if that makes sense? So, yeah. But I don't regret it, but I don't really want this to lead to tons of other wordless comics. I don't want them to be too encouraged to do wordless comics, because I don't think that many people are really up to pulling it off, and they just don't quite pull it off here. For me, I've heard other people who've loved it, and other people have been even more frustrated with it than myself. So then, in at number 2 was The Closet, and I enjoyed this a lot. It's by James Tynion, art by Gavin Fullerton. And it has a kind of, a certain kind of indie style that's both detailed but kind of kept simple. I heard someone compare it to David Mazzucchelli. I'm not sure if I really would have thought of that on my own. But, and I'm not sure if it really does compare to David Mazzucchelli. But anyway, I like the art, I like the color, and it seems so far, it's only going to be 3 issues, but so far in this first issue, it seems like a pretty basic boogeyman in the closet story. So whether it has more than, I'll enjoy it if it's just a boogeyman in the closet story. But if it has more to it than that, I will be particularly appreciative. And there's certainly some commentary here about marriage and, the seemingly responsible parent and then the irresponsible parent who feels nagged and pressured and is not enjoying the marriage because of the response of the more responsible member of the marriage. But there's some cool things about this spooky closet that I definitely appreciated. So overall, I enjoyed this. If there was a little more of a hint of it all having a bigger meaning or something more going on than just the classic boogeyman in the closet, I probably would have ranked it at number 1. But that's not what happened. So number 1 was this comic that I picked up on a whim at my second comic book store. I didn't notice till I got it home that it's by Sex Publishing. Or is that Kex Publishing? And it's odd because looking inside, you realize this is published by Comics Experience, which is an online, kind of an online comic book school that is also maybe an online forum for creators, for young creators or new creators. I don't know a whole lot about it, but I've heard about it many years ago. I think I heard the founder of it interviewed somewhere. But I'm not sure if they thought about that they sound like they're sex publishing. But it's not a porno book or anything. It is, as you can tell, it's an adaptation of The Conqueror Worm, a poem by Edgar Allan Poe. You could definitely interpret this poem a lot of different ways. But Clara Meath did a really good job of interpreting this as kind of a surreal play being put on for the sake of angels hovering over Earth and the moon. And the art's really cool. The imagery is really cool. It kind of gets, in my mind, kind of Lovecraftian by the end. And it's still kind of open to interpretation. But I think she did a great job of doing a sort of comic booky interpretation of a poem. I know I've read this poem before, but I'd completely forgotten what it was about, or maybe I mentally interpreted it in a completely different way until reading this comic. So I don't know. If I saw another poem comic by Claire Meath, I definitely would reach out and grab it. And I did sort of, as I was reading it, I was feeling like, well, this is not like a normal comic, although it kind of makes an interesting partner with Step by Bloody Step in a way that it's, but here it's more clearly metaphor. But it leaves a lot to the reader to fill in and make the connection between the poem and the story. And it sort of coasts along that edge of what I consider to really be a comic versus maybe just an illustrated poem. But it does provide a continuity, and it does have nice panel-to-panel continuity for the poem. And it doesn't get too abstract, but there is a sense of a certain amount of abstraction. So anyway, I was really glad to have read that, but it kind of caps off that feeling of kind of an odder week in my reading history. Now, I did read some other things that I guess I'll just show you in the last few days, one of which I enjoyed quite a bit, but I decided not to. I don't remember quite when this came out, but I just read it this week. The first 2 issues of A Town Called Terror. There's that glare again. And this is by Steve Niles, who did 28 Days of Night is his most famous work. But he's kind of a steady, he keeps showing back up doing horror comics at different companies, Dark Horse and IDW and now Image. And this artist, Simon Kodransky, does quite cool art, very suitable. It's the right art for this kind of horror story. And the coloring is really cool. And I guess Simon did his own coloring, which involves a huge amount of red. And so this is developing to be a story about a town full of monstrous characters that regular people can't get to. And our hero is someone who escaped that town, the son of this creepy character who comes back to life in different ways at different times, who has thought he escaped this town and gets dragged back in. And I'm not quite sure where it's all going to go, but I'm enjoying it right now. It's a really fast read. And every once in a while, the artwork gets too murky or relies too much on close-ups. And in a close-up, you're not always seeing what's going on, I guess. But that also works in the flavor of kind of a horror comic. And I love these double-page spreads. There's something cool about them. It definitely fits in with an Edgar Allan Poe kind of vibe. This artist would be great for Edgar Allan Poe. So I'm definitely on board for this. I have a feeling it's not going to go on too long. I've read other Steve Niles comics that tended to just be 3 issues and then done. Although I hope this one's going to be a bit longer than that. And then I slowly catching up with my Usagi Yojimbo reading. Read the end of this. I mean, it's not the end of Lone Goat and Kid miniseries, but it really was the end of this story, which either was 2 or 3 issues of Blood Wings Part 2, about these evil ninjas who are bats. And it was another really well done, well done Stan Sakai book. And Stan Sakai, unlike the complete opposite of Once and Future, his stories always feel right. They always have a satisfying storytelling shape, unlike the Kieran Gillen things, which they just feel a little alien to me in a sense of the way storytelling works. This one had a big protect the village. The samurai helps the villagers fight off the attack. So there was kind of a classic story shape to it. And I do have this issue somewhere, but I haven't read it yet, this next issue. And I hear that this is finally the lone goat storyline there. I also read most so far of this issue 34 of Back Issue, which focuses on Bronze Age rarities and oddities. And that is really cool to me. A couple of things here that stuck out to me. Let me see if I can find them. Well, we got an article on Evel Knievel comics, but that's not what I'm looking for. Excuse me a second. Okay, well, one cool thing is they did these Secret Origins DC comics that were sold with candy. I think around 1979, do they say, or 1980? And I totally missed these. I never saw these at the time. And I'm kind of tickled pink by the thought of it. I don't know whether I'll ever find any of these. They were kind of mini comics that were made especially for the candy. And the issue includes kind of a description of the plot of each and some sample pages. It's kind of a mystery. They had to do kind of detective work to figure out who the artists and writers were here, because none of them were credited, and people couldn't quite remember. And then there's an article about 25 Superman stories that were made just for, I believe it was the German European market originally, because Superman was selling so well to the foreign market that at the DC offices here in the U.S., they made a whole bunch of extra comics for them. And a few of them, I guess, eventually appeared here in the U.S., but most of them haven't. So I think one of these Gil Kane ones came up. And then an article about some rich British guy who hired DC, I think they say for $15,000, to make a Superman comic drawn by Kurt Swan, and starring the birthday boy at a birthday party and his friends. And they had the inker. So I think Kurt Swan did not make it look like the boy. They had the inker, who was Angelo Torres, make sure all the faces worked. So I think this might be the millionaire who did this for his son. So kind of fascinating. And I wonder how many other privately made comics there were. And then other stuff about variant covers of the Bronze Age sort, and other things I haven't explored in here yet. Oh, Kool-Aid comics, and what is this? Stuff with... Anyway, really fun. I love reading Back Issue, and this seemed like a particularly fun one. And then I've been kind of chugging along reading this sort of randomly picked up issue of Kitchen Sink's old Steve Canyon comic book, where they reprinted Milton Caniff's second most famous comic book, newspaper comic strip, Steve Canyon, which he owned the rights to, which is a great thing. Come on, focus. And I guess he was alive when this was being published, because there's an introduction by him talking about things he was thinking about when he was creating these strips from 1951. I'm finding them... I love the art. The art is really nice to look at. I'm finding them quite a chore to read. There's a certain vibe to it that reminds me of my reading of The Spirit, but where The Spirit seems light on its toes and fun and lots of interesting characters. Everything here seems a little bland and slow, and the writing seems awkward and overdone. And part of it is because it's a daily comic strip, and so there's a lot of repetition. And but another part of it is just this overly cheesy vibe about romance and the noble guys in uniform. I guess the war in Korea had started up, but they keep just saying the war in Asia. They don't talk specifics, and it just doesn't work for me. Maybe it worked in 1951, but for me, reading it now, it doesn't really work. It's a historical oddity, I guess. Steve Canyon comes to a university where he's supposed to be guarding the secret to make sure the Russians don't get the information on a secret work that a scientist is doing about a special kind of airplane field that they can create instantly. And he falls in love with his secretary, and he doesn't do a very good job of stopping the Russian spies or anything. It's just kind of an odd thing. The whole way the romance is portrayed, it just comes off strange. And I guess there's some kind of sense of humor. But I'm going to keep reading it. I'm this far in. I'm on page 50, and I think I have 15 more pages to go. So, and actually, at some point, after I got really excited over Terry and the Pirates, I discovered that this shop not too far away from me had a bunch of Steve Canyon magazines, so I just grabbed them all that they had. So I think I have 6 or 7 or 8 Steve Canyon magazines. Maybe some of them will be better than this one. Also, the crazy thing, because the whole thing is a will they, won't they kind of romance, and it's given, they give it away on the cover. He does ask Summer to marry him. So there you go. Spoilers abound. Okay, well, I apologize for that spoiler. But I guess it's no surprise that this would happen anyway. The cover does look cool. That this art looks great blown up. It's amazing the brushwork artists did back then, especially a great artist like Milton Caniff. So I'll be back chatting with you some more. I hope soon. I hope I get back into a regular groove. And I thank all of you who lasted all the way to the end with me with this complaining about Steve Canyon. Talk to y'all later.